Thank you, Jennifer, and that was really a very moving, inspiring, and fulfilling talk. I really appreciate you did it, but but we will not be out of here by 9:30 unless I give my 20-minute speech in 10 minutes, and I don't think I can do that. In any event, I want to thank all of you for all you do for the Atlas Society. The Atlas Society is such a wonderful organization, and given my personal debt of gratitude to Ayn Rand, it wasn't hard to sell me on getting me to support the initiatives here and the mission and programs of the Atlas Society. As a 19-year-old reading The Fountainhead and then Atlas Shrugged, I can still remember thinking, God, I found my people. And given the rise of progressive statists in the United States and around the world, bringing Ayn Rand's ideas to the next generation is increasingly important. They need to find their people in Rand's works, and this is something that, as you know, the progressive statists are very, very opposed to us doing. They will resist it at every turn. And the Atlas Society is playing a key role in fighting that battle, and for that we owe you all a debt of gratitude. That having been said, it's obviously been a real plus to bring Jennifer on as CEO at the Atlas Society. This is fundraising, and this is a fundraising dinner, people. This is what you do when you run a nonprofit, and it ain't easy. This is a very difficult task, but when you bring that passion, you heard it up here. When you bring that genuine passion the woman's license plate is Ayn Rand. When you bring that passion to an organization, you can't help but improve it. And I want to thank Jennifer for all she's done, and thank the trustees for recruiting her to this position. Now, as Jennifer said, she and I go back a long way. It's probably about a decade. We were both in the food industry, and so that brought us together. Politics brought us together because, as you may know, the collectivists are attacking the food industry very relentlessly over the past few years. And I didn't really know until she asked me to have lunch with her in Santa Barbara, which is where I live. That's in the People's Republic of California. And it was before I moved back to America. I now live in Nashville, which, by the way, Nashville is a wonderful place to live in after California. I'm not a socialist. I can't live in a socialist state. I just couldn't do it anymore. Anyway, back to my lunch with Jennifer. California is such a bad. Now that you can't, they just. The new law is that it's no longer a felony not to tell people you have AIDS, even when you donate blood. In California, this is real. The LA Times had an article on it. It's just the strangest place on earth. Anyway, while we'd known each other a long time, we really didn't know about our mutual admiration for Ayn Rand. And really, that's kind of surprising, because Jennifer's not a shy person. She's not the kind of person who doesn't say things. But we found out at this lunch. And of course, when she said she'd been appointed to or taken a job as the CEO of the Atlas Society, I said, great, I love Ayn Rand. And in fact, I have 6 kids, and I had all of my kids read Fountainhead as a prerequisite to their getting a driver's license. You can't get your driver's license until you read the Fountainhead. And all of them went on to read Atlas Shrugged. And the books had a profound impact on my kids. But The Fountainhead was the first book that I had them read. And it was the first book I read by Ayn Rand. And so it was the first book that I had them read. And one of my kids that it immediately impacted, and I want to share the story, his name's Matt. He's now 25. He was obviously 16 when he was reading Fountainhead. And he came down. One night, my wife and I are watching TV. We're just sitting on the couch. And he comes down with this book in his hand, excited as can be. He's like 3/4 of the way through it. He's got his thumb in the book. And he goes, I just read Howard Roark's speech to the jury. Where did this come from? Like, why haven't I heard about this? Why don't they teach this to me in school? And I looked at my wife and I said, this one will be okay. And Matt was okay. He went on to graduate from the business school at Washington University in St. Louis with honors. He worked here in worked here in New York for about 3 years as an investment banker with Guggenheim Securities, making an embarrassing amount of money right out of college. And now is taking a job with the Ford Motor Company in Detroit, working on M&A in their autonomous vehicles division. Now, personally, I bought stock in Ford when they hired the kid. I'm not giving, I'm not giving stock advice. I'm just saying, you know. In fact, all of my children who read Atlas Shrugged have done very well. I've got 4 of them out of college. I just told you about Matt. The other 3, my oldest son is one of our nation's nuclear physicists. He's got a doctorate in theoretical physics from Georgia Tech and works at Lawrence Livermore Labs in California. My next son is an attorney, went to Pepperdine and works for Thomson Reuters, lives in Minnesota. My daughter lived here in New York for 13 years as a fashion designer. She's now married to a great guy who's a decorated Iraq and Afghanistan vet, and they live by us in Nashville. And I told you about one of the 3 younger. I have 2 other youngers. I have 5 boys and 1 girl, and the 2 other young boys are at Washington University, the youngest majoring in business, and the second from the youngest is now in his 4th year of an architecture program, maybe inspired by Howard Roark. And now the question is, am I just bragging or does this have a point? And you know, honestly, exactly. Honestly, it's probably both. You're very good. So anyway, after I finished telling Jennifer about my kids and how I believe reading Ayn Rand's books had a very positive influence on them, she had this very puzzled look on her face, which surprised me because she's not a puzzled person, first of all. And second of all, I thought everything I just said would kind of get right to her point and she'd be happy about it. So I asked, I said, what are you surprised about? And she said, but Andy, you're Catholic. And I said, well, yeah, I am Catholic. And she said, and you raised your kids Catholic. And I said, in fact, I did raise my kids Catholic. And she said, well, you know, Ayn Rand was an atheist. And I said, well, I know she was an atheist. And I just shrugged, and you know, no pun intended. And told her that I also encourage my kids to read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, like Ayn Rand. I want my kids to think for themselves. I want them to look at the facts, make their own determinations as to what they believe. I certainly did that, as I'm obviously, thank you. I'm obviously not a pure Randian objectivist, although I remain a huge Rand fan. And Jennifer said, well, doesn't it bother you that she's an atheist? And, you know, I started thinking, I said, well, no. You know, I was more concerned about what she thought, but now I'm starting to get worried. I said, well, should it? You know, should it bother me that she's an atheist? And she said, well, I guess not. She was very honest. I guess maybe it shouldn't bother you. And she wrote a Wall Street Journal op-ed on this conversation. And what I told her next was, and it was in the op-ed, I said, there's no contradiction in my mind, between raising my children in the church and urging them to live the kind of lives of achievement, integrity, and independence that Ayn Rand celebrated in her novels. And on a very fundamental level, the reason I had my kids read The Fountainhead wasn't to influence their politics or their religious beliefs or even to encourage them to become good capitalists, but thank God they became good capitalists. It was because I wanted the same thing for my kids that all of you that have kids want for your kids. You want them to be happy. And the kind of happiness you can get only from what my friend Arthur Brooks calls earned success. The happiness that can only come from what you achieve and cannot come from what you're given, either by your family or by the government. I wanted them to understand that the importance of material success isn't what you possess, it's whether you earned what you possess. There's nothing more common than rich kids who end up with everything and they're alcoholic, drug-addicted, miserable people. And I wanted my kids to understand that you get true satisfaction from doing what you believe is right, not what others consider to be right. I wanted them to know that conforming for the purpose of getting approval, the approval of others, is wrong and only leads to misery. And that's why I encouraged them to read Ayn Rand, because to me, her ideas, and indeed her philosophy of objectivism, contains the tools for living a happy life. So while I know this evening is about celebrating the 60th anniversary of the publication of Atlas Shrugged, I'd like to talk for a moment about Ayn Rand's other classic work, The Fountainhead. Now, I love both books. One of the big disappointments in my life was when I was 19 and found out there was no sequel to either book. But as a 19-year-old reading those books, I walked away, I think, a different person. So let me talk about a couple things from Fountainhead that I think sum up Rand's Rand's ideas with respect to what are the keys to a happy life. The first is actually from the opening line of Fountainhead. Does anybody remember what that is? Exactly. Well, you know, I mean, really, as far as I'm concerned, that line is as good as the best of times, the worst of times. I mean, this is a classic Howard Roark laugh. Now, he's standing on the edge of a cliff, both literally and metaphorically. He's just been kicked out of architecture school. He knows the days, the years before him are going to be challenging, but he had the confidence, the character, and the courage to know that he could face those challenges. And you know, that's how this book starts. Reading that sentence, that scene, rereading that book a number of times throughout my life certainly helped me to face adversity with at least a smile. Maybe I didn't always laugh, but I at least smiled. Whether it was losing a case as a young trial lawyer or losing a nomination battle for the president's cabinet, in my case, both. And I wanted my children to understand that if they believed in themselves, they could have that inner strength. Now, Jennifer visited me right after I'd withdrawn my name from consideration as President Trump's nominee for Secretary of Labor, and after my 17 years as CEO of CKE Restaurants had come to an end. And by the way, a lot of people told me, Andy, you're going to hate retirement. They were dead wrong. I love retirement. I recommend it. But sorry, David, I know you're not ready to retire. And by the way, you know, a very well-deserved award. I meant to say that before I started talking, but I got so involved in what Jennifer said that I forgot. But anyway, congratulations. Thank you so much for all you've done. But withdrawing my nomination was really a very difficult experience for me. And for a couple of months, I faced a barrage of personal assaults where the truth was irrelevant, which is one thing I didn't realize going into this, that the truth would be absolutely meaningless. And I couldn't defend myself as the progressive left attacked me with a vengeance. And while they were unable to that did not drive me out of the race. Matter of fact, at one point they left white powder in an envelope with a paper doll with a noose around its neck and a pink piece of paper that said Trump. And they left it on our front porch addressed to my wife, who opened it with a puff of white white powder. Anyways, I took her out for a margarita. I called the FBI, a terrorist task force. By the way, you didn't read this in the press because this would actually helped me. But a terrorist task force came to the house. We came back from the Mexican restaurant. There were fire engines there with guys in hazmat suits. You know, the next morning I said to my wife, I'm just going to withdraw. I said, this is far more than anybody anticipated. And she looked at me. She said, so you're just going to let the bad guys win? So I didn't withdraw. I had been roundly chastised. But there was all this criticism coming from the left, and it didn't affect, my family was super through this. My wife was absolutely super, she always is. But it did affect the Republican senators, some of these weak-kneed Republicans that didn't vote to repeal and replace Obamacare, who were worried about on tax reform. These are the people that I lost. And they were very threatened by the fact that Betsy DeVos had been approved, and as you know, the vote was a tie. She didn't get Collins and Murkowski. And the vice president came in and broke the tie with his vote. And then they were swamped with calls and emails. And they went home, and there were town hall meetings where they were berated. There were people protesting outside their offices. So eventually I lost 3 senators, and you can only lose 2. Mike Pence would have broken a tie if there was one, but I was one short of breaking a tie. And so I ended up withdrawing because I didn't want the president to have a defeat on the floor of the Senate before he even really got going that had my name on it. Not to be one to tilt at windmills. I decided that the smart thing to do was to withdraw. But it was disheartening. The hearing that never happened would have been my chance to defend myself, and I never really got that. So, and as someone who'd been both a laborer, I'm a working class kid, and I worked my way through college and law school with a family. Became CEO of an international corporation with $4 billion in revenue and restaurants in 45 states and 40 foreign countries. But I truly believed I could help President Trump reduce the size and power of government and incentivize businesses to grow, creating jobs, improving the lives of all Americans, and American workers like I had been in particular. It was my chance to give back to America. This is the only country in the history of the world where a working class kid like me could have aspired to the level of success that I've achieved with any realistic chance of achieving it. And it's because the founding fathers, Adam Smith, Hayek, Ayn Rand, knew something that not a lot of people know, that if you depend on the individual strength of people striving not only to meet their own needs and meet their families' needs, they end up meeting the needs of an entire society. Look at Steve Jobs. I mean, how many people have an iPhone? You know, I mean, I have one here. I have a kid who calls me every time I'm giving a speech. I got it on vibrate. I know, it's the lawyer. I know he's gonna call. Anyway, Dee and I were both at home. Jennifer came to visit, and it was right after I had withdrawn my nomination, which, as I said, was a very difficult process. Our home in Nashville was a mess. We'd moved in September. I was nominated in December. I met with the president in November. I was nominated in December, and then it was just like 2 months of just, drinking from a fire hose. And so we're undoing boxes. The place is a mess. And Jennifer and I talked, and after a while she goes, Andy, you seem awfully happy. Are you sure? My wife actually said recently that, she said, I know that, you wanted to do this, that you wanted to give back to the country, and I know it would have been for the best for the country, but aren't we really a lot happier that we're not in Washington, D.C.? It was really a hard thing to argue about. But anyway, Jennifer says, you're awfully happy. Are you sure you're okay? And I reminded her of that opening line in Fountainhead, how no dean of architecture, no Ellsworth Toohey, or his present-day counterparts, Elizabeth Warren or Chuck Schumer, and no weak-kneed Republican senator can put out your inner fire, your inner spark, unless you sanction them to do so. And I believe Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged teach that lesson far more effectively than anything I've ever read or experienced. I wanted my children to understand that inner strength is something you give yourself and that others can't take it away from you. Now, I loved a recent post the Atlas Society had on Facebook. I don't know if you saw it, but it read, if your children need safe spaces, you failed as a parent. That is absolutely true and unfortunately very relevant for today's youth. Having my children read Fountainhead in exchange for the privilege of driving was my way actually of protecting them, but not protecting them from adversity, but protecting them from ceding to adversity the power to determine their own happiness. Now, the second scene is really, probably is my favorite. It's the Dean of Architecture. It's so early in the book, but I still loved it. The Dean of Architecture invites Howard Roark to his office, hoping he's going to get this groveling apology from this upstart student, and he's about to be sorely disappointed. The dean says, you're not seriously thinking of building buildings in that crazy fashion, are you? And Roark says, yes. The dean says, my dear fellow, who will let you? To which Roark replies, that's not the point. The point is, who will stop me? What an incredibly important point that is. The point isn't who will let me. The point is who will stop me. And I also wanted my children to learn what I believe is the Fountainhead's most important lesson, and that lesson is that the whole world can think you're wrong, and you still might be right. Now, understanding that simple point, so well expressed by Howard Roark's struggle, is what can lead children to ask the most important question: why? When pressured by their peers to go out and get drunk, I wanted them to at least ask why. I knew they'd still do it, but I wanted them to ask why. When pressured to support Barack Obama or vote for Bernie Sanders, I wanted them to ask why and to expect a rational answer. And then to have the confidence to decide for themselves. Because like Howard Roark, they knew that every one of their friends that were advocating following this really cool political candidate could be wrong. And they needed to make the decision about whether or not they were right or wrong for themselves. I wanted the takeaway for my children to be that they were responsible for their lives. They should question authority, not seek the approval or the sanction of society or standards set by others, and to not blindly follow the rules set by others. My kids learned that lesson. Unfortunately for my wife and me, they may have learned it a little too well when they were living in our house and under our roofs. But our intention was to raise independent thinkers, to internalize the idea that no one can do your thinking for you, not even the Atlas Society, and the Atlas Society would be the first to tell you not even Ayn Rand. Now, I want to end this just talking about one last quote, and it was a quote that came up today. It's another really great quote. The hardest thing to explain is the glaringly evident which everybody has decided not to see. For our youth today, as was evident by their overwhelming support for Hillary Clinton and even worse, Bernie Sanders, what is glaringly evident that everyone has decided not to see is that socialism, collectivism, is an abject historical failure. Whether it was the Soviet Union, Red China before they adopted their form of capitalism, Cuba, North Korea, or until recently, the much praised by the left Venezuela. The lessons of history couldn't be clearer. Socialism does not work. Now, to ignore that fact is not to see what is glaringly evident. Yet how many Ellsworth Tuohys are there out there today? You know, we all know who they are. And by the way, they keep changing their names because people figure out what they actually believe. You know, they're the Marxists, the socialists, the progressives, now the democratic socialists. But their collectivist ideas are the same. They want to gain control over the lives of others. They hold themselves out as unselfish humanitarians while attempting to convince others to sacrifice the most important thing in their lives, their values, in exchange for society's approval, meaning their approval. Their real goals are political. The Rorschachs of the world will stand up to them. The Peter Keatings will not. So if our youth prefers approval over values, if they approve conformity over independence, as Keating did, we are lost. Ayn Rand's writings stand as a bulwark against this onslaught of collectivist thinking. But those writings need to reach our youth, and they will not reach our youth absent the effort of parents and groups like the Atlas Society. Now look at our colleges and universities. Once bastions of free speech, they now cater to snowflake students and their desire for safe places to protect them from reality. How did that happen? You remember the joke after Reagan defeated communism in the USSR, Eastern Europe all converted, left the communist governments, Red China was nervous. And the joke was the only place you could find a Marxist was the faculty lounge at Harvard. But that's no longer the case. And I'll bet there's a lot of young people in here that don't remember that joke. You know, according to the Heterodox Academy, it's a politically diverse group of scholars concerned about the loss of viewpoint diversity in our universities. They've got a great website. You should go to it. There are a lot of scholars signing up for it. David, you probably know what it is. But Heterodox recently noted that in the 15 years between 1995 and 2010, American universities, quote, went from leaning left to being almost entirely left, close quote. Heterodox explains that while 12% of university professors identify as conservative, their numbers mostly come from professors in schools of engineering, business, and other professional schools. The percentage conservative for major humanities and social science departments is close to 5%. Now, many of these liberals and far-left professors are especially hostile to free markets and capitalism. A poll of social science professors in 2006 found 24% were self-described radicals, 21% were self-described activists, and 18% were self-described Marxists. I have a friend who's a chancellor at a major university. It's not Washington University where my kids went and I went, but a different major university. And every time we talk, he complains about the Marxists on his faculty and how he has to deal with them. And by the way, that 18% that said they were Marxists, those were the ones who admitted they were Marxists. They're not the only ones on the faculty. The Marxists are particularly prominent in schools of sociology, where 1 out of every 4 professors self-identifies as a Marxist. In the liberal arts schools, it's 1 out of every 8. Look, our values are under attack through our children, and attempts to eliminate First Amendment protections that might expose them to the truth. It takes organizations like the Atlas Society to stave off those attacks. And this is a fight we just can't lose. So supporting Jennifer and the rest of the Atlas Society team, for those of you who are atheists, I want to say thank you. For those of you who aren't atheists, may God bless you. Thank you for all you do. In closing, I wanted to end this like with some really powerful thing, but it's only 20 minutes, and I had to tell you about what's going on in the universities, right? And then I wanted to rush through it so we could get out by 9:30, and it's like 9:44. So, but in closing, let's all go out there. Let's fight the collectivists for our nation's future. Let's fight for our children. And if I may quote another Ayn Rand admirer, let's make America great again. Thank you all.